Welcome to the Writers Are People Too podcast, where you might just learn that you shouldn't meet the writer of your heroes. Tonight we have with us Polly Schattel. So, Polly,
Yes.
thank you so much for coming on. Before we get into your writing, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. We had an interesting meeting, and so it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just a writer. I'm a writer and a filmmaker, just one of those creative fools. And I kind of call myself a storyteller because I like to play in multiple fields. And so, yeah, I just have stories I want to tell, and sometimes they come out in books and sometimes they come out in movies, and that's just the way it is. Um,
Yeah, I feel that a little bit as well. I've never yet written a full screenplay, and I'd love to get in the film industry. Right now, it's just been novels and stuff like that. But I do feel the different sides of creativity. But we'll get to some of your filmmaking in a little bit. But going back to what you said a second ago about how we met, for a little context is kind of funny. I used to do acting in college, and I got the itch a few months ago, and I was like, I really wish I could get back into the acting community. I love the community. I love getting up and feeling the adrenaline rush as you're forgetting your lines and trying to spit them out. Like, that's always fun to me. And so I went on Reddit and I posted in our city's Reddit, and I was looking for filmmakers in the area. And Polly kindly invited me along on a shoot. And it's funny because when you're growing up, your parents are always like, be careful who you meet on the internet. I mean,
that's
this is the
right.
perfect case of it, because you might just find yourself suckered into doing some stranger's podcast. So thanks for coming on.
No, you're right. And
Um,
you know what? I love your look. The camera loves you, brother. The
well, thank
camera,
you.
honestly, I mean, some people have that look that just clicks with the camera, and you've got one of those looks. So you should pursue it,
Awesome.
you know?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to use you a little bit to get a toe in the industry. So invite me along in some more shoots, and we'll see what happens.
I will do that.
Awesome. Yeah. So again, we're going to get into your filmmaking a little bit further down the line, but first, let's start with what some of the things that you like to read. What kind of stuff do you like to consume?
Well, I like it all. Right now. I'm reading a Thomas Pynchon book, but
Hmm.
I kind of caucus with the horror writers. I'm considered a horror or maybe a dark fantasy writer.
Okay.
At some point, those kind of things kind of blur. You think of somebody like Guillermo del Toro, and is he horror? Is he dark fantasy? Does it matter what you call him at that point? And
Hmm.
so I'm kind of in that category where I love fantasy and I love horror, but I'm not. I've never done anything like slasher or anything like that. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested more in um, just I'm interested in people, honestly, and
Hmm.
what these situations that you write about in horror novels, what that reveals about the people. And so yeah, so it's really character centered stuff
Hmm.
that I like myself.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what makes every story good. Like, anybody can write a story about lasers, but you gotta tell the story about who the lasers are trying to kill and who they're trying to protect and stuff. Or
That's right.
in the case of fantasy, what the magic is doing.
That's
Um, you mentioned Thomas Pynchon. What are you reading by him?
The Crying of Lot 49. I'm rereading that, and I'm writing.
Okay.
I'm right now I'm writing kind of a dark fantasy noir comedy of all things. It's one of
Hmm.
those things that's kind of hard to categorize. So he's got the right tone. I actually read a lot for tone. I read for voice. And I'm really interested in just, in that noir voice. And so I've actually read a lot of noir in preparation for this project. And of course he has some really great kind of post noir um, novels. And so I'm kind of looking at his voice because they're funny. It's kind of satirical. It's kind of over the
Hmm.
top. It's kind of meta. So that's what I'm looking for. And that's
Yeah,
something.
I've only
What?
sorry, I think we're getting a tiny bit of lag, but yeah, I've only read one novel by him. It was Against the Day, and it was like this thick.
Yeah.
And I read it in college. I couldn't tell you much about it, but I know he's like one of the great American authors of our time. Is he still alive? Do you know?
I He's so private. He's one of those guys. He's like Salinger who like basically hides. I could not tell you
Hmm.
still alive.
Okay.
But yeah, his stuff is famously thick and obtuse and real hard to kind of get your head around. So of course, I read the Wikipedia before I even read one of his books. I kind of already know what happens. So when I read it, I can be like a step and a half
Mm,
ahead of where I would have been if I didn't know anything at all. Because it's pretty
yeah.
impenetrable, you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So you mentioned you're writing a dark comedy. So how are you tying together this darkness and this comedy, the lighthearted part of it?
Well, it's. I mean, it starts off as a noir kind of crime thing, and then it goes into more of a fantasy sort of thing. And it's the kind of thing that if I wasn't a published writer, it'd probably be certain suicide. But since I've kind of crossed that barrier a little bit, I can get away with it, which is
Hmm.
it's a weird barrier because once you've proven you can be published, people sort of look at you a little differently. They take you a little more seriously, which is kind of a
Mm,
joke because, as we know, there's a lot of great unpublished writers out there, and there's a lot of
hmm.
terrible published writers out there. But it's
Yeah.
something I wouldn't. It's a chance I wouldn't take if it weren't for. I've had a little critical acclaim. People seem to like my stuff, even though I haven't sold a whole lot. And so it's one of those things of just following your passion. Like write the
Hmm.
book that you yourself would want to read. And
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
so I'm writing a book about that starts out. It's kind of satirical, dark, noir, kind of almost like the Coen brothers. You know how they can be kind of funny, but at the same time it's pretty dark stuff.
Mm.
And then it veers into a more fantastical place.
Okay.
So
Got it. So you briefly touched on published versus unpublished. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on self-publication versus traditional publication as well. I guess we'll start. Are you traditionally or self-published?
I'm traditionally published. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, self publishing is great. I mean, a lot of people I know have had great success. I've got friends who are self published that sell a shit ton more books than I'm selling. And, but with a traditionally published thing, what happens is there's an automatic legitimacy that comes with it
Mm,
because you have passed like a publisher has given you the okay that you're good enough to be published by them, that they want to take a chance on you and
mhm,
put for and spend and spend effort from a team. They've got editors, they've got copy editors, they've got cover artists, that they're willing to put their resources behind you. That says something to everybody else. That says that
yeah.
this person is got something worth checking out. That's what
Yeah.
like traditional publishing does over self-publishing. And when I'm talking about traditional publishing, I'm talking about small press publishing, not the big five that everybody talks about, but more it's indie publishing, indie books.
Mhm.
Um, but that said, let me just make the point that I have also friends who are self published who are critical darlings. They have changed the industry. They have had tribute books put out just about them. So I think it's becoming more and more meaningless, that line, every
Mhm.
day.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did you first set out on your creative journey then?
Well, it's been a long time coming. I mean, I should have been published years before I was. I'll just give you the 1 minute synopsis. I was an English major in college, wanted to be a novelist and a writer.
Same.
Um, then I lost confidence. Everybody was so fucking smart, man, and everybody was so brilliant that I just kind of felt out of place. And when the digital revolution in film happened in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, that's when I was like, okay, film, I can tell my stories in film. I realized that not many people are reading books. There's a bigger
Mm,
audience in film. So what I did was I actually put all my resources into sort of a plan B, and went and chased filmmaking, and I wrote scripts and I directed and I made some features, and they got out there and it was pretty cool. Was never able to make a living off of it though. Um,
mm,
and then after a while, I started to hunger for books again. and I wanted to tell literary stories. So I went back to plan A and started writing a book. It took me 4 years to write my first novel, and it eventually got out there and was, seen in the
Hmm.
public.
Awesome. Yeah. So you mentioned on your website that you taught film directing, screenwriting, and film editing, and then you mentioned a couple feature films. What were your roles on those?
I was writer director. I always wanted to be at the head of the line, for better or for worse. And instead of, I'm a big believer in, instead of, working as an assistant director on somebody else's film, you should go be the director on your own film and just learn right
Hmm.
away how to do it. And so that's what I did. And it was a good strategy in some ways and a bad strategy in others. Bad because I didn't have the craft that probably should have had. And I didn't, I wasn't, I didn't spend my 10,000 hours. Let's put it that way. On the
Hmm.
other hand, you go right to the head of the line. And my first film was shot on 35 millimeter, and it got distribution. It got out there. It was like, for a little bit, it was like an international selling thing. You can still find it online, and people still like it. So I guess it was good on that level. And I got a deal. I got close to making like a couple $1 million movie, and eventually it kind of died in development. It was a real
Mm.
rough experience, and a lot of it was indie film kind of died and went to TV. Everything started to go into cable and streaming, and The Sopranos and Hulu and all that stuff started, and so everything
Hmm.
went towards streaming. So the indie film scene died. Um, and so I just wanted to say, God damn it, I want to write my stories. And I didn't have a budget to write a historical fantasy, because you need, Model T cars, you need to shut down streets, you need to get horses, you need wardrobes. It's expensive. So I thought,
Hmm.
I'll just write this one as a book. And it took me forever. Here it is, by the way. I've got my little books ready. Here's my book,
Yeah. Is this the occultist that we're talking about?
The Occultists. And
Awesome.
as you can see, it's kind of a historical fantasy. And I just got lucky. I sent it out to a couple of places, and it was really wild, man. There was the first place I sent it to wanted it, and I had there were some weird vibes from this company. They were Scottish. They were up in Edinburgh, and they wanted it. And I looked at their stuff, and I was like, it's not. I'm not. I'm not Tolstoy by any means, but I thought these guys are kind of small. These guys are kind of. I don't know if I mean, there was something that I didn't like about them. Turns out the lady was like this complete white supremacist who was like unmasked later on, and I had no idea. And so I think my gut was telling me to back away. And it took me another year to get to submit and submit and submit, and finally somebody bit. And what they are, their name is Journal Stone. They're called Journal Stone. Here's their logo, and they are known for sort of finding new voices out there in the wild. And they
Hmm.
found me, and they brought me in, and everything I've gotten published since then is through Journal Stone. So I'm really
Okay.
lucky in that respect.
Awesome. So regarding the occultists, you pegged it as a historical fantasy. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So what about it is historically accurate, and what of it is the fantastical part?
Well, I did. It took me a long time to write it because I did a shit ton of research. I'm one of those people like Stanley Kubrick, who everything's got to be right. You got to have the
Hmm.
right. You got to have the right flowers in the vase on the table, or the whole thing falls apart. So I did a lot of research about that era, and it's kind of funny too, because in hindsight, it's it uses a lot of tropes that maybe I wouldn't have if I was more experienced. For instance, there's the magic school of youngsters that they learn magic, and what does that sound like? Sounds a little bit like
Harry
Harry
Potter.
Potter. And So, and so I was flirting with disaster just by spending so many resources and so much time on this idea that is kind of threadbare at this point. But I think it was fresh enough to people really liked it, and I've even had some crazy stuff like Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, is like one of my biggest fans. He wrote me like this incredible fan letter, and so
Wow.
weird stuff like that. I've had a couple bites from Hollywood. Some movie people have asked me if the rights are available and things like that, and
Hmm.
so that's kind of fun. It's like. Uh, there's interest in it beyond just the initial publication. So I'm real proud of that.
Awesome. So as far as the research that you did, how deeply did you have to insert yourself into the occult and cultist practices for
The,
researching for this book?
the occult, like the whole thing of like magicians and magic and even stage magic and beyond. They have kind of a it's like never tell the secrets. Basically, there are secrets
Hmm.
involved in never tell. And so
Yeah.
I had to basically do my own research, and I cross-referenced multiple things. I read biographies of important people. I read a history of the occult in America. Um, and so there was a lot of research, but of course, a lot of it is really, I mean, if you think about it, it's the first 5 paragraphs on Wikipedia. Like, for instance, if you need to know about period wagons, just go look at wagons in 1900. There's the first
Hmm.
5 paragraphs, and that's really all you need. Because again, you're more interested in the people. You just drop in these little things just to, like, for instance, the ladies' hats back then were these really big hats. And what are they called? Okay, let's do 5 minutes of research. Okay, boom, got it. Put it in the thing. And so with the internet and Wikipedia in particular, things have really gotten a lot easier for people with those kind of details.
And let me give a little suggestion here that I've recently come across. It would be AI. And so I'll pull up Chat GPT next to me and I'll just ask it questions. And I found in my most recent novel, which is it's a fantasy, but I was doing a lot of research on castles and stuff like that, and just period questions. And so it really cut back on my research time by just asking it questions, and it would just spit out like a little summary for me. And I was like, oh well, that's a good word to use, and I guess this makes sense as far as the layout. So just a little hint for you if you want to skip out on the hours of Wikipedia research.
Yeah, and it's cool. I mean, there's all kind of things, I mean, really what you're looking for is just those little details to give it what they call verisimilitude, like some reality.
Mhm.
And once you have that, like for instance, how much did a hamburger cost in 1904? Okay, it costs a nickel. Okay, good. He goes up and buys a hamburger and slaps a nickel on the counter. And so you don't
Yep.
want to get lost in the research. You just want to kind of touch on it here and there enough to know you, that other people can tell you, you know what you're talking about. And
All you have to
but
do is know more than they do.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And but for the occult stuff, I really had to go deep and learn a lot of it. And actually, for people who know the occult, basically the history of the occult is like in the book. So
Mm.
yeah, I mean, it was a lot of research, probably too much research, but research is fun, man. It's so much fun. Like right now,
Hmm.
I'm working on a fantasy that's my next project that's going to be set in some unnamed past, like the Persian Empire. So I'm researching like eunuchs and stuff, and I've got all these books lined up. I'm so excited to read these books about like eunuchs in 13th century Persia and stuff like that. So it's fun, it's
Awesome.
part of the perks of the job, really, you know.
Yeah. Um, going back real quick to your favorite genre, I guess we'll call it. You mentioned horror. So what draws to you about reading and creating in the horror genre?
Um, it's just fun. I mean, there's the obvious excitement and drama. There's high stakes. There are, often in stakes like that, character is revealed. And of course, who doesn't love Stephen King? I mean, he's just so much fun. And, the horror genre has just been, is really just writing in Stephen King's shadow. I mean, he's so
Hmm.
brilliant. He's so good at what he does. He's sort of like the Beatles of horror writing. And so we're just kind of playing in his sandbox. And it's fun,
Hmm.
it's just a lot. It's great. You come up and, in H.P. Lovecraft. As a matter of fact, the short film that we worked on together is really kind of an H.P. Lovecraft film. And so it's just, there's something about that is just undeniably really fun, I think. I think that's what it comes
Okay.
back to. I'm not into the
Awesome.
blood and the gore and the torture porn and all that stuff. That's not for me. I mean, it's fine if somebody
Uh-huh.
wants to do that, but I'm more interested in the tease and the drama, and again, like the characters. Like, what does that say about the characters?
Yeah. Well, you keep saying something interesting, which is like it goes back to character reveals plot. Excuse me,
That's right.
plot reveals character. Got that backwards.
Yeah. Right.
And characters, how they're important. And they really like that's the reason we read or watch a story is to understand and connect with the characters, and then maybe put ourselves in their shoes and say, what would I do if there was a big monster coming after me? Would I behave the same way as that character, or would it behave differently?
That's right. That's right. I mean, it is like a vicarious kind of situation. And the more we learn about characters, the more we learn about ourselves. And that's
Hmm.
really what we're after is learning about ourselves, I think.
Yeah,
So tell me
absolutely.
about your books. Tell me about your projects.
Well, let's focus on the one I just finished. This is going to be well, it's a fantasy, and it takes place in a secular kingdom. So they don't know anything about magic. They don't really follow religions. They're very grounded in science. And the king he dies, and kingship is thrust upon his son, the prince, who is now the king, and he's a drunk and he's an asshole. And so he has to learn how to manage the kingdom in spite of all of his vices, we'll say. And in the same time period, a mage shows up to the kingdom and starts doing magic. And everyone's like freaking out and like saying, "What is this? We didn't even know magic was real. This is crazy." And then they get sucked into a war with another kingdom. And the king basically has to exile in light of a an assassination plot against him, and he has to go and learn the magic and try and take the kingdom back. So that's a quick synopsis of it.
That's awesome. Love it. That's really cool. It sounds like something I would love to read, honestly.
Well, if you want to be my beta reader, I'll send you a link.
I'll check it out. Yeah, I'll check it out. I've got a blurb that I'm doing immediately, so I'm not going to be able to read it like right away, but I'd love to
Oh
check
yeah,
that.
no problem. Yeah, in the next couple of months, that's fine with me. I'll send you a link, and then I'm happy to return the favor if you want any beta or alpha reading.
Okay. Well, that's the beauty of not only the writing community but the horror community is that everybody looks out for each other. Everybody is
Hmm.
helping out. They're so generous, and we're all in it together. And so there's a lot of people doing favors for each other and reading stories and reading books and giving advice, and so it's just par for the course. It's what we do. We help each other out. Pay it
Yeah,
forward, they say.
yeah, absolutely. So going back real quick to your screen, your filmmaking. Um, you had mentioned that you were doing writing and directing for yourself, and I can see how it's almost easy in a certain way, not easy, but it's easier than the question I'm about to ask to put your own words and your own vision for those words that you've written out and put them on a screen. But what are some of the challenges of taking someone else's words that they've written and taking their own screenplay and directing that out?
Well, honestly, I haven't done that a whole lot. I've written most of the stuff I've done. Um, there was a Stephen King adaptation I did a couple years back, which was have you ever heard of the Dollar Baby program?
I have not, no.
Well, Stephen King's really awesome. He's in addition to being like an incredible writer, he's just like a good person. And
Hmm.
sorry, I got a hair in my mouth. And what he did on some of his more obscure short stories, he put them out there for filmmakers to adapt, and you have to pay him $1 to do it. So
Hmm.
it's called the Dollar Baby program. And so we adapted one called Here There Be Tigers, which was actually the first story he ever wrote. And
Hmm.
my partner Jennifer, whose house you were at that night, she wrote the script, and so really, I was just the director. I didn't write this one; I just directed it. but it was so well done and so plain where it should go that really it kind of spoke for itself. Like, I think the best writing is kind of directing, where basically you don't, there's, the script answers any questions that actors might
Mhm.
have, or any approach is all kind of right there on the page. So it's not as hard as it might seem.
Okay. And as far as you having written both novels and screenplays, what are some of the similarities and differences between those two mediums?
Well, they're both stories. They both, have a beginning, middle, and an end in their own ways. The differences are more interesting, I think, because novels are very concerned with what they call interiority, like the psychological world of these characters. Whereas a film, you can only show the exterior. You can't get inside their
Hmm.
heads. So you have to create that situation in a different way. Like, for instance, in a book, you could say he was really angry and blah blah blah. In a movie, they have to throw a vase against the wall because they can't say he was
Hmm.
very angry. So you have to dramatize that emotion. And for instance, in this last project that you were a part of, it was adapted from a short story, and you know, um, it's very interesting because in the story, it goes way into the guy's thoughts and he tells you all these things, but he doesn't actually tell you what they're doing. Like, it doesn't say they sat at a table and drank a glass of water. So you have to kind of create that situation. You have to say, well, I know what they're not doing, but what the hell are they doing? So we had to invent these moments for these characters to sort of portray what the story was talking about uh, in their thoughts.
Okay.
So that's
Interesting.
that's the main difference.
Hmm.
Like, basically, a screenplay will tell you so and so went through the door. A novel will tell you so and so went through the door, and here's what he was feeling while he did it. And that's a real interesting, an important sort of distinction. It's very much focused on what happens in here rather than, um, in the exterior world.
Yeah, absolutely. What does your future creative journey look like?
More of the same, really. I mean, more books. I don't know. I mean, the movie thing is hard because you need cash for movies. You need a team
Hmm.
of people. You need resources. You need cameras. You need lights. You need audio. So it's more resource intensive. I'll probably write a lot more books. Frankly, I really enjoyed it, and that's one of the reasons why I started writing books in the first place, was because the money part of movies is so prohibitive. I mean, you can, anybody can go out with an iPhone and make a movie nowadays, and that's wonderful. But to make a movie with production value and interest and sustained interest over, 20, 30, 90 minutes, you need resources. And unfortunately, those are hard to come by. Asheville is a
Hmm.
great town, but it's not a movie town.
Yeah.
And so, good luck trying to find some money for a short film, because it's not there. I mean, this last thing, I basically paid for it myself. I'm one of those
Hmm.
dumbasses who gets a little extra money in their pocket and spends it on creative stuff I'll never get back. But I just wanted
Well,
to. I
yeah,
mean, I
and
get to
you're
be
not
here
the
with
only
you.
one. I talked to so many. Sorry, I think a little bit of lag. Um, but yeah, you're not the only one that pays for their creativity out of their own pocket. I speak to so many authors who are like, yeah, I self-financed my self-publishing and I haven't made a dime back, but I love it nonetheless. I love sharing what I've done. And I think that is something that a lot of artists just want to do is we just want to get what's inside of us out and have other people experience that.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not about the money. Like, I've published two novels and some other stuff, like a novella. I haven't made enough to make a living. Like, nobody I know makes a living as a writer, but we do it
Hmm.
because we're just driven to do it. I mean, it's so hard to sit down every day and sacrifice, your time with your child and your wife and your job, and to go,
Yeah.
I'm going to spend the next 2 hours working on my novel. And honestly, the novel is probably not going to make that much money, but we do it anyway because it is so fulfilling and we're driven to do it, you know? And
Yeah,
I know you are
absolutely.
too.
Yeah. And it's hard because I don't know if what I'm doing with this podcast is productive or if it's procrastination, because maybe I should be writing right now. I don't know, but I do love talking to authors and giving them a platform to speak from, and learning from them, and seeing what the future holds for both of us.
Yeah.
So my final question to you then would be, what messages do you want to give to any other aspiring creatives?
Um, just do it for the love of it, you know? I mean, the doing of it is its own reward, you know? Like
Hmm.
shooting that film, you know, that Saturday night you came out, it was stressful as hell. Let me just be straight up stressful. But it was still fun. I mean, it was creatively fulfilling, and I got to meet people like you. I'm working with like some of the best actors in town. It's amazing. Books, you get to take that little story that you have in your soul and put that in other people's heads, which I think is really important. You know, it's a tiny form of immortality, you know, that
Mm,
you can write a book that will outlive you, that will be here when you're gone, and a little piece of you survives on, you know. And I think that's important, you know. It's a way to change the world a little bit in a small way, or at least give somebody some entertainment, you know.
yeah.
So I think that's what I get out of it. It's There's a little ego involved, you know. You're like, I have something to say and I want people to hear what I have to say, but that's fine. That's the way it is for everybody. I would hope this it's the same for you too, you
Yeah.
know.
One of my favorite quotes is, writing is an act of ego, and we might as well admit it. And it's, if to say, what's going on in my head, I think is so important that I got to write it down so you can see what's going in there too.
A little bit I mean, that's fine, you know. A little bit of healthy ego is great, you know. Use it, you know.
Absolutely. Well, wise words, everybody. Polly Schattel, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.